gratitude can also be about taking action so that our resentment is addressed. And I call that a gratitude practice.
Welcome to Settling's Not an Option. I'm Adam Nebbs, and I'm here with my co-host Amanda Stanhope. This show is for anyone out there who feels like they've settled for an unfulfilling life. Whether you've settled in a relationship, the work that you do, or how you feel about yourself, we're here to tell you that settling's not an option. If you're liking the show, please follow us on Spotify, Amazon Music, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have any feedback about the show or want to recommend a topic, you can email us at cheerstoNotSettling@gmail.com. Finally, to conclude, if you feel so inclined, you can donate to us on Ko-fi, where we're aiming to buy some new audio equipment. So we have a guest with us today. We've had a little bit of a hiatus from snow, but it's really nice to have a guest back on the show. And with us today, we have Dr. Kerry Howells, who is an author, award-winning educator, and an experienced researcher in the practice of gratitude. Dr. Howells has published several academic papers on the importance of gratitude in school leadership and teaching, education, elite athlete coaching, and academic learning. And her most recent work focuses on gratitude and resentment, culminating in a book that was published in 2021 titled Untangling You: How Can I Be Grateful When I Feel So Resentful? So welcome to the show, Dr. Kerry Howells.
Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you. So we'll jump in and maybe just keep things quite broad to begin with. I imagine most of our listeners have heard of gratitude. We've talked about it in the show before, but can you unpack your understanding or definition of gratitude for us?
Yes, sure. So I come to this topic as a philosopher and a philosopher of education. So philosophers are really interested in the complexities and the dilemmas of concepts. And that's how I started out. And then when I started applying it to the field of education, I realized how complex gratitude is. On the surface, it's quite easy perhaps to comprehend, and everybody has their own definition of gratitude. So it's the feeling of being grateful for being alive, the feeling of being blessed or that you've received something. And I have advanced that theory, that kind of notion, to a notion of deep gratitude, where I'm defining gratitude as the acknowledgement of what we've received from another person, and then the action of giving back out of acknowledgement for what we've received, but in ways that aren't necessarily reciprocal. So how that might look in a school context, for example, is that we're grateful for being at a particular school or having wonderful students. And then that's the beginning of gratitude, but gratitude doesn't become deep or have its full potential until we act on that. So that teacher might then go and greet the students at the beginning of the day with a heart of gratitude. So that then becomes gratitude because they've acted on it in some way. And they're doing that with a heart of, oh, I've received this from my students and I want to express my gratitude to them.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I remember you talking in the TED Talk, which goes back quite a few years now, but I remember you talking about the fact that you didn't see gratitude as a feeling so much as an attitude. And it sounds like that's maybe what you're describing there.
Yes, it's an attitude and an action. So it's much deeper than just our emotions, how I define it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, and emotions are fleeting, whereas
right.
What you're talking about is building a mindset or almost like a personality trait.
Yeah, it's developing an inner attitude, which is like our outlook to life. So our feelings might come and go, but we've practiced gratitude enough and we have it center in our minds enough to really respond to much of life. Not all of it, because that would be saintly too much, but the ideal is that we respond to life situations with an inner attitude and outlook of gratitude. So we might have negative feelings going on, and at the same time, we can be grateful because gratitude is at a deeper level of self.
Okay.
That's very interesting. And speaking of the TED Talk, which I really enjoyed, probably one of my favorite moments of it, especially as a researcher, is when you told the story of when you went to the library and you were looking up, I suppose the meaning behind the words think and thank, deriving from the word thonk, which I don't know, thonk just sounds like the greatest word ever. But yeah,
I love that too. Yeah,
it's just so good. But yeah, so that TED talk from 2013, which is titled "How Thanking Awakens Our Thinking," I was like, well done. I think that's one of the key successes of a TED talk, is being able to get the title correct. So you've done well there. But can you maybe just talk a bit about the core message of this talk around, thinking and how thanking can obviously awaken our thinking?
Yes. So just as I explained, gratitude is an inner attitude, so that we could also say that gratitude is our way of being in the world. And much of education is being constructed to be only about thinking on that cognitive level. And my students at university who were studying philosophy were full of complaint and dissatisfaction, even though I thought that they were really blessed to be able to study this course. And in our conversations about what their problems were about during the course, I was able to recognize that the inner attitude that they brought to their studies was the opposite of gratitude, which was full of complaint and dissatisfaction and resentment. And so I just suggested to them that they might try gratitude. And that was the beginning of 25 years of research, because they realized that they, well, number one, they wanted to be engaged, but they didn't know how to be.
Okay.
And number two, once they applied gratitude to their thinking process, to their studies, and started with in what I call a state of preparedness, which is the theory I developed in my PhD. Once they approached their studies with a state of preparedness, which was getting into a state of gratitude before they started their day, before they started their studies. So just reflected on what they're grateful for, even if they can't find it about what they're studying, just something they could be grateful for. And to consciously bring that attitude to the studying moment, their thinking actually improves. So their cognitive ability improved. And there's research since that time that has proven that gratitude can have a really big impact on our thinking cognitive processes.
Okay.
And so that really helped them to be able to be more engaged and more connected to the subject matter and more alive and more and certainly easier to teach. So
Sure,
I thought, oh, there's something in this. And so I really invested. That group of students and other groups of students then became my research participants. And yeah, so the story started there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I could see how that would play out very well in a classroom setting where you'd be able to see the results of practicing gratitude, or the result of practicing gratitude and the impact that had on the learning or the thinking.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me kind of think as well, it almost ties in, I suppose, with that either fixed or growth mindset. It was interesting after watching that TED talk, it made me really reflect on when I have a good moment, when I'm studying versus a not so good moment. And it's all mindset is a really key component. And that's why I think, that diagram, and I encourage people to listen to the TED talk, but that diagram that came out of your thesis, that kind of talks about that preparation is absolutely vital. I think, it doesn't matter how much time you spend in that research mode or in the activity you're doing. If the mindset's wrong, you're not going to, you're just not going to digest the content as well. You're not probably going to think about it as critically as you could. So that'll be my biggest test. I'm having one of those low to motivation days today. So maybe I need to practice a bit of gratitude and see if I can get myself into a bit of a growth mindset. So I think it's a really good message.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. And that kind of leads on to my hypothesis that we look for really complex problems. We look for really complex answers to really complex problems, like not being able to study well, disengagement, procrastination, etc. And yet sometimes it can be the very simple answers that are right in front of us, like practicing gratitude. It's deceptive, isn't it? Because we we think it couldn't be that simple, but what my research is showing is that it is that simple. And yet gratitude is also quite profound, and it's something that we need to be kind of working on and being vigilant about, because there's so much that can take our gratitude away, isn't there?
Oh,
Indeed.
yeah, that's very easy to do, or to have happen throughout our days.
Yes.
I guess what would you suggest to somebody? So say somebody is starting out their day with a heart of gratitude, or however you want to say it, and then something comes along that is poking at their resentment, or some other negative emotion is pulling them out of a good thinking space. I guess what would you suggest to them to get back? What's the quickest way, easiest way to get back to that?
Well, this is why it's really good to think about gratitude as a practice.
Yeah.
And also to be thinking about it as an inner attitude and a way in which we're approaching life, or our studies, or the situation where we're focusing on with our gratitude, because negative feelings will come along, and this is not about replacing negative feelings with positive feelings, because that's just putting a positive veneer over a negative situation.
Okay, sure.
It's much deeper than that. It's choosing one thing that we're going to practice gratitude for. So, for example, Adam, with your studies, you might just choose. I heard you say that you really have a wonderful supervisor. So you might just practice gratitude for the fact that you've got a really wonderful supervisor, because it's not the case with a lot of other PhD students, I know. And so, just practicing gratitude for her, and just be thinking about how wonderful it is that you have such a supervisor, can put you into that state of gratitude, and you grow that in your consciousness at the beginning of the day, and then as you're approaching your studies. And so therefore, when the negative stuff comes along, you're not as susceptible to slipping into that negativity. It will be there in the background. But then another answer to that, which I've explored in my new book, is that we do need to also address our resentment, because where there's resentment often has the stronger pull. Sure. And it pulls at us because it's known as an emotion of justice, and we feel deeply wronged by a situation. For example, a PhD supervisor who's neglectful and who doesn't read our work for 3 months, and or just gives us one line answer feedback, that's enough to cause a lot of resentment. And so gratitude isn't about being grateful for that necessarily. That's really hard, because what needs to be done is to address our resentment and to take action so that we don't continue in that state of resentment. And at the same time, growing our gratitude somewhere else can give us the resilience to be able to face our resentment and unpack it and address it, rather than being consumed by it. So there's a constant interplay between gratitude and resentment.
So is that what you mean? Because I remember you said something, you've said a couple of times about taking action. So that's the action, is facing the resentment or whatever other negative emotion you're having. Is that the action part of that?
Yeah, that's the action part of it. Okay. So we often think about gratitude as being grateful for being alive, or expressing gratitude to people we like, etc. But this is much deeper than that, in that gratitude can also be about taking action so that our resentment is addressed. And I call that a gratitude practice, because resentment is so tricky and so hard because we've been deeply hurt. And so we don't just take one action, because it's unrealistic to think it can be solved just by one action, just like it is by one thought or one feeling. It needs to be something that we practice over time. So, for example, if we're having conflict in our workplace and we're at stalemate with one of our colleagues, and we feel like they've really hurt us, but nothing's changing. So if we take the courageous and humble move of saying, well, I'm going to take action because something needs to shift here, and we might greet them in the mornings, for example, or refrain from backbiting them because we're really hurt, and that's a natural way to go about it. or we choose to smile at them, even if it's just in the form to start with. That's a gratitude action, because we're moving, because gratitude and resentment are opposites. Every time we move away from resentment, we're taking a move towards gratitude.
Okay,
And
that
so
really makes it
gratitude
clear.
practice.
Yeah, that really makes it easy to visualize how that would play out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and and we'll kind of chat about your new book as well very shortly. But even as I was kind of thinking then about what you were saying, it kind of almost feels like it has parallels. This gratitude practice to to Stoicism and like Socratic ways of thinking. Which is, even when you're in that really dire situation where things are not going well, and you can still sit there, and I suppose Socrates would say, well, okay, just be grateful that it's not worse than it is now. It could always be worse than it is, and who knows how this is going to play out in the long run, even though it's not going well now. So I think that's the kind of which is what I really like about you need to acknowledge the resentment that you have in that moment. But there's always a path forward, which is gratitude. So I think it's a very optimistic and nice way of thinking, which is probably what we need now, given we're in a pandemic. So
yes, yeah. That's why this work is very popular at the moment.
Yeah.
But I must, if you don't mind, Adam, I'd like to draw a distinction here, given that you're using the Socratic method. Let's just be Socrates for a little while. I really think it's important for your listeners to draw the distinction between gratitude and optimism and positive thinking and positive acknowledgement or praise, for example, because even though they can be expressions of gratitude, gratitude is the inherent difference, and it's a really important one, is that gratitude is about acknowledging what I have received from another person or another situation, and then being motivated to give back. So it's this constant giving and receiving cycle. And whereas positive thinking or optimism can just be about our feelings or about it's a one-way kind of thing. Gratitude is inherently social, relational, connected to the world. And that's why it has potentially such a transformative force in helping us not settle for difficult relationships, or not settle for a feeling inside us where there's conflict, because it is really activated by the relationships in our lives. So I want us to move away from the individual notion of gratitude and move more towards the relational, even though it often starts with the individual. I think it's truly transformative force potential in society is in the relational.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. I definitely have always thought of gratitude, I suppose, as an individual practice. So it is nice. It's challenging my thinking, and I've just got to get my head around the relational piece. So thank you for clarifying, because I imagine a lot of people are still viewing gratitude as something you sit down, you do yourself, you don't do with others. So it's fascinating.
And at the same time, to acknowledge that's where, like, to acknowledge people's own definition of gratitude. I'm just bringing my own thinking to the process, because I don't want us to replace that. It's our own definition of gratitude is often deeply entrenched in our socio-historical religious background. And so we've got to honour that at the same time. But this is an invitation, if we're going to really consciously apply it, this is an invitation to really step into the really huge potential of gratitude in our relationships, and to not stop with just feeling it for ourselves.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, speaking of your book, and just to kind of to mention the title once again, so Untangling You, How Can I Be Grateful When I Feel So Resentful? So we've kind of touched on parts of it anyways, and obviously we'll share in the comments a link to the book, and you can get a sample copy of the first chapter, which is a really wonderful introduction into the book. But can you just tell us about the core message of this book, and really what drove you to write a publication on that?
Yes, because, okay, so I go back 25 years ago. So I started with my students and then I did a whole development of strategies and workshops and going out into schools and universities and working with students. Then I realized with my own students that my own inner attitude of gratitude or resentment, which is the opposite of gratitude, was really impacting on them. So I realized that in order for my students to practice gratitude, I, as the educator, needs to practice. So I moved my pedagogy from students to teachers. And then the teachers would say, yeah, but what about leadership? So then I moved from teachers to leaders. So now I've got this kind of comprehensive approach to all three levels of any educational organization. And so I've gone all around the world and presented on this topic very passionately.
Oh, wow.
And there's bits and pieces, like I would kind of mention to start with my story about the students being in the opposite state, and then about how philosophically and conceptually gratitude is the opposite of resentment. And so where there's resentment, we can't have gratitude, and where there's gratitude, resentment has less chance of taking hold. And then as I progressed in presenting this, no matter where I was, that was where the workshops started to come alive. That was where the workshops started, people started to be really engaged. So in my first book, which is called Gratitude in Education, A Radical View, which I took 10 years to write because I was pioneering this whole approach in education, I do have a chapter in there called In Toxic Waters, and it's outlining how gratitude, it's hard for gratitude to thrive in educational institutions where there's resentment, and how much the resentment brings down the whole school. Mm-hmm. and impacts on student learning. And then I'd have book clubs with principals, and they would go to that chapter straight away. And so I realized that there was an intense interest in this question: how can I be grateful when I feel so resentful? And it was actually a question that was asked by many participants after workshops or in the book clubs. And so then I just decided, then I researched it, and there was nothing written on it. And so I thought, oh, well, okay, I'll be the one who writes this book. And, awesome. And I had so much material. And and I really wanted, my first book was really more theoretical because it needed to be, and I was coming to it from as a philosopher. This one I really wanted to write for the general public, and so it's got a whole lot of different scenarios that hopefully will resonate with everybody. And the core premise of it, besides the fact that we need to address our resentment if we're going to be truly grateful, the core premise of it is that resentment is never okay, even though it's part of the human condition. I love the title of your podcast because, you know, if we settle into the fact that we have resentment and we just accept that, which is how, unfortunately, many of us in society, Western societies especially, have just settled for mediocre relationships in workplaces, in personal relationships with their children, because they're just, the resentment is so complex. Yeah. And that's why this whole kind of metaphor of untangling the resentment is so crucial to us not settling for mediocre relationships and really aiming for something much higher. And so the core premise of this is that we're the ones who have to take action, because it's often, like I said, it's often at stalemate. And once we do take action, we do start to experience more vitality and less toxic things happening in our bodies and in our relationships in our world. And so it's very freeing, but it's probably one of the hardest things to do, because resentment tricks us into thinking that we are justified in holding on to it. So I'm having a conversation with resentment in this book and saying, no, you're not going to trick me. I'm going to outsmart you. And I'm going to be the one who's taking agency here and who's choosing my inner attitude. And gratitude gives us a really great reminder that there is another choice we can make.
Yeah, no, I love that. Gosh, there's so much in there. I'm just trying to digest it.
Sorry, I've raved on a bit. Sorry.
No,
You probably
that's
wanted to
awesome.
interrupt me somewhere along the line.
No, I like I can just relate from all the things that Adam and I have talked about in prior shows and work that I've done on my own. It just ties in so much of what you're saying. And so I've just yeah, it's really resonating with me what you're saying and how profound of an impact something so simple could have on your life. And just even realizing that you have the power to choose not to be resentful, because I really think some people just don't even believe that they have the power to change that mindset. Like so many people have almost like, if you want to call it the victim mentality.
Yes,
I found that a lot in your work, or
yes.
Yeah.
At the book launch, which was in the Hobart Town Hall, I had a delicious question from somebody in the audience, and they said, what happens if I just love my resentment? Like it's just so it's so much part of me, and I really love being resentful to my ex-husband. And it's true, like it can become part of our persona, and many people object to this core premise. They go, look, I need my resentment. It's because and I've explored this in my book, it's emotion of justice. So we are getting justice with the other person by holding on to resentment, and resentment makes us feel that. But as Nelson Mandela famously says, and I've got this in my book, he says that, I'm just going to read it out so I get it right. He says that resentment is like drinking poison and hoping it will kill your enemies.
Yeah, I was thinking. I was thinking of that.
Yeah. So that's such a great statement, isn't it? That when we think that we're hurting the other person by holding on to our resentment, and we think that by giving up our resentment, we're letting them off the hook and condoning their unacceptable behavior. But actually the only person we're hurting is ourselves, because quite likely they've moved a damn about us anymore, that we're holding on to it, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you're so right. You know, you captured it really well in that anecdote in that first chapter around Sarah and Dave. You know, and here's Sarah again, you know, just so frustrated and resentful of Dave, not communicating that frustration. Dave, meanwhile, is completely unawares of the fact that she's so resentful. But it's so true. It is this core belief we have in our head, which is, you know, I have to hold on to this resentment so that, you know, they get their, I suppose it's the justice. And it's just such a strange thing. Where does that come from? You know, I suppose I had a follow-up question, but it was really just around, you know, why do where is this origin come from that makes us think that it's a good idea in any way?
I just think it's part of human nature. Just it you know, that we have this moral fiber in our being that says this action is right and this action is wrong. And if we didn't have that, we would be really uncivilized, I guess, and we wouldn't have the justice system that we have. It's just more that there's stuck emotion around that we haven't learned to manage. And we haven't learned to express our resentment well, and because, you know, I in this book I have this chapter called Speaking Up About Our Grievances, and I've waited until chapter 8 to put that chapter in, because in all my workshops, again, people would say, I'd rather die than confront that person. I know somebody who's climbed the Himalayas, come back from cancer, had 5 kids, done a PhD, but to speak about her pain and her resentment to the other person is terrifying.
Wow.
So a part of human nature also is that we're really highly relational. We really care about our relationships, even though we would like to sometimes pretend we don't. And therefore, anything that threatens the relationship further or makes us feel more vulnerable and more hurt and more resentful in the relationship to the other person is really hard. So this is complex and at the same time very rewarding, but we live in a quick fix society, and a lot of the pop culture around positivity and positive psychology in some instances and everything are very much about quick fix, and resentment is hard, and this stuff is hard and incredibly rewarding for our development of ourselves and not settling and being more expansive in ourselves. You know, it's just more not looking for the quick fix, looking for the opportunity to grow over time with the practice.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's well, it's got to be the hardest part of it, or the hardest part to get buy-in from people, I guess, because like you said, we're kind of conditioned to want immediate results.
Yes. Yeah, but there is a lot of buy-in because people don't want to be stuck anymore.
Yeah.
They're over it. And I think the pandemic has really accelerated that. Like, we've had to stop and look, haven't we? And really reflect on what's not working in our lives. And so I think, and many people buy this book to give it to other people, though. They think, oh, I know someone who needs this book, often their ex-partner or somebody.
Right. It's like, here, I don't need this, but you do. No.
Yeah, exactly.
That probably doesn't go over too well.
No.
But no, makes so much sense. And I mean, that's one of the best lessons I've ever learned in my life, is when I was seeing a counselor after my divorce or during my divorce, and she told me, you don't forgive other people for them, you forgive them for yourself, to let that go so that you can move on with your life and not carry that burden around. And that's what I'm hearing you kind of saying, is like reminding me of that. And that has to be one of, if not the best lessons I've ever learned, because it carries over into so many areas of life.
Yes, and in my book, I also explore the notion that the forgiveness, because it's very related to resentment, isn't it? But what I say in this book is that we often say I'll forgive, but I won't forget.
Okay.
So the notion of I won't forget is where resentment resides. And so, you know, we know that when people say, I really forgive you, but you know underneath that they hate you. Because they feel like, again, to forget what you've done seems like we're making what they did okay.
Right.
So that's why we really need, alongside forgiveness, we also need some strategies for moving past our resentment, don't we?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's very profound. I love thinking about that, because that is such a common thing for people to say, I forgive, but I won't forget. And it's almost like we're going, you know, I'm such a big person because I've forgiven you. I'm just making you aware that I haven't forgotten. But really, it's like, well, we're only kidding ourselves. It's like we may as well just say, well, no, I don't forgive you at all, because as I've said, I'm not going to forget. I am going to have that resentment there. We both know it, but it just will make both parties feel better because I've said that I've forgiven you. But yeah, so it's like we've almost covered that surface level thing, but we still, that deep resentment is there, and we need to still reconcile that and really try and throw that saying out of there until we're truly ready to forgive the person and move away from resentment. So it's very profound. I'm going to just be very aware if I ever say that, that I need to get rid of that resentment. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that's been a very, very interesting conversation. And I think what a wonderful book. I'm certainly going to read it, and I encourage our listeners to do the same. Because I think it is ultimately, it needs to be a book, because it is the ultimate objection, isn't it, to practicing gratitude, is that it's always going to be contingent on, you know, not resenting the other person. And we'll find it really hard those are the people that we probably need to practice gratitude with the most, the ones that we resent. So I think a wonderful topic, and will be very, very helpful to our listeners. And if people want to find out more about your book, you know, or watch your TED Talks or any of the content that you do, Kerry, where's the best place to find you?
Yes, so I'm offering a 10, so the best place to find me is my website, www.kerryhowells.com. I've got a lot of resources, blogs, podcasts up there, and links to where you can buy my book. If you're in Australia, I'm offering a $10 discount on my book to your listeners and to anyone that they want to recommend it to. And you just put the discount code UNTANGLE in capitals, UNTANGLE 10, but you can probably put that in your description of the talk as well.
Definitely will.
Unfortunately, I can't offer that overseas because books are taking forever to get overseas at the moment. So you're going to have to buy it on Amazon. It's going to be available in all bookshops around the US from May. And it's available in New Zealand and Australia in all major bookstores as well, and on all online platforms. And anyone who buys the book from any of these platforms, I'd really appreciate a review, only if it's going to be good though. And yeah, so yeah, I'm just passionate on getting the message out there. So I love the opportunity for people to, now I'm in the season of shameless self-promoting my book.
No, it's
so
good.
awesome.
You've got to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's so great to hear that it's going to be on bookshelves in the US. I just love to hear that. That just makes me happy. So, because I just know, I mean, I know how much I do some writing myself, and I know how much work goes into that. So it's just great to hear that.
And Amanda, you're going to have to take a photo. If you find it in a bookshelf somewhere in Michigan, please take a photo and send it through to us.
Yes, that would be awesome. All right, so we'll I'm going to do a formal wrap up here in a minute, but Kerry, did you have any last thoughts or anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to say before we wrap up?
I would just like to leave your listeners with a message which has driven the book and driven my work for the last 25 years. And I've kind of alluded to it, but I'd just like to emphasize that relationships in our lives really matter. And as Adam said, it's probably more important to express gratitude in those difficult relationships than the ones that it's easy. But just to work on this one relationship at a time, one gratitude practice at a time, over time, and to give ourselves time. And it's not about changing another person. It's not about expressing gratitude so we will get something back in return or that they will change in some way. This is all about changing ourselves, and to be really patient with ourselves in relationship to resentment, but to really capture the rewards and to be watching that happen inside us. But let's not push the difficult relationships into our outer circle and push them away. One by one, let's bring them into our orbit and work on them, because I think that's the only way we're going to really move forward together in the complexities we're facing at the moment. So I'm on a bit of a crusade. So thank you for helping me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And yeah, I love that summary. That's, yeah, very powerful. So, all right, I will wrap things up here. And I would just say, if you made it this far, we really appreciate you sticking around. And we really appreciate if you could follow us on YouTube, Amazon Music, or Spotify, whichever you prefer. Like the videos, leave some comments. All this stuff helps us get out to more people, and we really appreciate it. And we'll just say, until next time, cheers to not settling.
Cheers to not settling. Bye.